Sorry for the sweet Caroline.
That's all right. I have a daughter named Caroline, and she thinks whenever the song plays that everyone's singing to her in the park.
Well, perfect then. Perfect. Are you a Red Sox fan? I mean, were you before you?
I am from Boston, so I've always been a Red Sox fan, but what drew me to the organization more than the team itself was Fenway Park. There's just something magical about it, the traditions, the history. I think everyone has some memory that involves the first time they were there, and that's what connected me more to the organization. That's what got me excited, more so than the actual team. And since I've been there, I've actually gotten very into the team. It's funny, my husband will say, I've never seen you watch a game so intently before, but it does kind of spur on the passion once you're there for it.
I love Fenway Park. I've been there. I don't tell my parents I said that because I am from New Jersey. I'm a Yankees fan. I should get that out front and center. How are the Red Sox doing?
So we just clinched a playoff berth last night. We will at least be playing in the wild card game.
Oops.
And I know the Yankees are still 3 games behind us.
Right. But I think we have about a week or so.
Yeah, a lot can happen.
a lot can happen. And so you've been with the Sox for 6 years now.
Yes.
And how do you think the culture has shifted from when you began to around now?
Sure. Well, we've always had a relatively good culture, and it's hard not to. It's a fun organization to be a part of. The people there are truly passionate about the team, the organization. They feel very connected to it. So we have the opportunity to just naturally do a lot of nice and fun things for our employees. But what we lacked until a few years ago was a set of values, which I'm a big believer in, having come from an organization where that was so important. And so we lacked having kind of a very intentional focus in terms of what was important to us and what we wanted to do. And the other thing that I noticed when I first came in was we had a really strong focus on external parties. So our fans, the media, our sponsors, and we really kind of focused a lot of our time on that. Without really kind of intentionally focusing on the employees and creating a really kind of intentional culture linked to the values. So that's what changed within the last couple of years.
Right, you kind of think, okay, you work for the Sox, you're obviously going to
Yeah, you have a baseline already of like, it's pretty good here. You know, when we go to the World Series, we take the whole front office. When we win the World Series, we give everyone rings. So naturally, there's already a level of, you know, excitement and connection and feeling like you're being cared for that you might not have somewhere else. But we did lack that really intentional, what's important to us, what kind of behaviors do we want to foster, what's that kind of ideal that we want to work towards. And so that's what we did in the last couple of years.
And you mentioned that was around the same time as a leadership change as well.
Yes, so Sam Kennedy, our current president, was promoted into the role, and he really wanted to focus on culture as something that was strategic. And one of the things that he and I talked about was, you know, we talked about not having these values. And I think, you know, in a lot of organizations, values are just words on paper, and they don't really, you know, they're not connected to anything that you do every day. But I had come from an environment where they really were connected. And without having them, I felt kind of like a ship, you know, that, you know, just rudderless, really. And so we got together and really kind of created a set of things that were really important to us, and some things that we were good at and some things that we weren't good at, that we recognized and openly stated we needed to get better at. And since then, we've been taking a lot of action to support those.
Right. Why do you think Sam puts the emphasis on that? Is that atypical of a sports team culture, because they kind of assume that people
everything's already good?
Yeah.
Well, I think Sam's been in baseball for a long time. He's worked for the Yankees. He started at the Yankees as an intern, even though he's from Brookline. He worked at the Padres and now the Red Sox. And I think he recognized very clearly that baseball is more than a job. It's really a lifestyle. When I was interviewing, a lot of people would say it's a lifestyle here. And I didn't really understand it until I got there. And really what people mean by that is you're not working a traditional work week. You know, your social lives, you know, your professional life is everyone else's social life. You're working 10 games at a stretch that are nights, weekends, holidays. The games end, you have 3 concerts. You might be lucky to have a day off before you have another 10 games, and that goes on for a really long season. And so people are there a lot, and we wanted to make sure that they really enjoyed being there, because the option of not being there really isn't an option.
Right, right. Sounds like a startup, actually.
So it's really an interesting culture. It's funny, if you are one of the lucky few that can go home on a Friday and not work over the weekend, you need to be really cognizant of not saying, have a great weekend as you're leaving.
Oh, right.
Because most of the office is there all weekend long for these games.
Right, wow. And so you mentioned the values. That was one of the first things that you did.
Yes.
Was that leadership driven or employee kind of by committee? How did you develop the values?
It was kind of both. We started with a group of leaders talking about what's already special about us, where do we see the gaps, what are some kind of key things that we want to make sure that we're focusing on. And then we took that to a lot of informal culture leaders within the organization, people that we knew had a pulse on what employees thought and what was important to them. And so we spent a lot of time just baking the ideas before we came down to the 5 ones that we have.
Right, and pop quiz, can you read them off?
Yes, so we have longer statements for each of these, but the general themes are a unified front office, meaning that there's no one function that's more important than any other one. We're all one team. Strong and authentic relationships, which are, with each other, with our partners, with our fans, with the community that we have and support. An inclusive and diverse environment, that was very important to us, and one where we saw some gaps that we needed to work on. Open and honest communication. That was another one that was a struggle for us because we're such a public organization. Everyone wants to know and pontificates what's going on within, and it's funny to listen to sports radio, knowing what's going on the inside and hearing what people are saying, and it's just an interesting perspective. But in the past, we had been very guarded about what information we shared with employees because we were nervous it would get out to the media without, our knowledge and in a way that we didn't want it. So that was a big gap and something we wanted to change. And then the last one, which was one I think was really a strength for us already, was something that we call being in the yes business, constantly figuring out a way to get it done, to figure out a way to say yes, to do crazy things. I think it was 2016, we had a 180-foot ski jump in the middle of center field. So not saying no to any crazy idea and really making sure that we kind of go for it.
Yeah, you mentioned, when we were chatting last night, you mentioned there was a virtual suggestion about changing or using a brand name for the chicken fingers instead of the stadium chicken fingers. And
my favorite Tiny Pulse suggestion.
Your favorite Tiny Pulse suggestion. And you said afterward, you're like, oh, the media would just murder us for that.
Oh.
And I'm wondering how does that play a lot into the HR and the general operations of the team? You always have to be thinking, okay, we're under a magnifying glass,
yes.
We have to do this.
Yes, and we're also all ambassadors of the brand. So we need to make sure whenever we're, at a barbecue, at, a friend's barbecue, whatever you say and whatever questions people ask could kind of, have a ripple effect and get out there, and we need to make sure that we're being careful of that.
Right. And when you communicated the values out to the employees, how did you do it in a way that kind of felt authentic? At certification yesterday, we were talking about values and how sometimes values can just be words on a wall, and
right.
you keep on talking about them, but you're not really acting on them. How did you communicate them in an authentic way?
So we started out at a town hall. Sam Kennedy, our president, stood up there and said, you know what, we have a lot of work to do. We want to have the best culture in all of sports, and we know that we're good in some areas and not good in some areas, and talked about what those 5 values were. And I think what helped is he did it in a very honest way by saying, we're not there yet. These are our ideals, and we want to be held accountable towards them, and we're going to start putting some action to them. And then he talked about some actions that we were going to start taking and would continue to do. And we've been very, I think, intentional about, as we take actions, linking them to the values so people can kind of see where they're connecting.
Right. Yeah.
Before we started using Tiny Pulse, we did a few things that were in direct response to it. So, for example, we have 1,500 employees, and half of them are really more kind of event-based game day staff, so our ticket takers and our ushers and our security staff, and they were not on our email. And it was so crazy to me and impossible to communicate to them, because you would have to communicate to their supervisors and ask their supervisors to communicate certain messages to them. And some people would and some people wouldn't, and a lot of people were left in the dark. So one of the first things we did was get everyone on our email system.
I remember that from when you were getting started.
Right, and then I thought, how am I going to send them a Tiny Pulse if I don't even know their email? Right. So that was one of the first things we needed to do before we even got Tiny Pulse out. So we did things like that to focus on communication. We, I think it was 2016, the end of spring training, our last spring training games, it was the Blue Jays against the Red Sox, and they were in Montreal. We took the whole front office up on buses and went up to Montreal for the weekend because we wanted to focus on having that unity and deepening those relationships. We started a group called the Breakfast Club where Sam Kennedy and myself invite 10 different people, mostly junior level staff that don't have a lot of interaction with him, out to breakfast once a month, where it's just an informal meal, questions, input, and that went right to communication. So we really tried to link things and then let people know why we were doing them and what values they reinforced.
Cool. And you mentioned that one of the ways you brought the values into action was bringing on Tiny Pulse. Mm-hmm. And how did that go? And I know that you had obviously a strong advocate with Sam in doing this. Mm-hmm. How was kind of bringing it to the organization, communication, buy-in, et cetera?
Sure. So, well, first I want to give a shout out to Carrie Campbell, who's in kind of the middle of the room, who's been my partner with it.
Yep.
One of the nice things about the Red Sox is that if you're interested in something, and I think this is a special thing about our culture, all you have to do is raise your hand, even if it's outside the scope of your job. And so Carrie, who works running our non-event business, said, culture is something that I'm really passionate about, and I'd like to work with you and Sam on really helping to, build upon what we've started and sustain it. And so she's really been my partner in launching it. And we wanted to make sure we picked the right time to do it. We didn't want to do it in the middle of the season. We were very careful about launching it in March before our season started, when all of the baseball folks, like all of the minor league coaches and scouts and trainers, were all together down in Florida instead of all separated across the organization. We knew that certain parts of the organization would take to it more than others. But it's been really key to focus on engaging the managers with it, I think. Because we can't do it with 1,500 employees. We can't do it all ourselves.
Yeah, we find that Tiny Pulse is best owned by an HR team, leadership, but then empower the frontline managers and mm-hmm. directors to respond directly, because as you said, it's hard to get that much feedback from that many folks. And I remember when we were doing training for the administrators, it was kind of like herding cats a bit. There were about 60 of them, and I'd send
probably too many. I probably had too many, I think. Yeah, I think so, because I think if you have too many from one department, no one feels like they own it, and then everyone thinks someone else is going to do it. So I think that's probably one thing I learned that we might need to, fine-tune. We're only 6 months into it, so I think that we probably can make some improvements there.
And do you find that any surprises of, wow, this person's really, really into Tiny Pulse. I didn't see that coming, or the obvious ones.
Yeah, well, for the most part, I think I knew who would be engaged with it and who wouldn't. I wish I spent a little bit more time in the beginning getting the people that I knew wouldn't be engaged in it a little more involved instead of kind of seeing how it went. But what I've noticed is the groups that are really big, like for example, our security staff, we have probably 250 employees in our security staff. And it's not the head of security that's on there monitoring and responding. It's actually one of the supervisors. So it's kind of like 3 levels down. And he's one of the best administrators we have. And I think he sees it as a really great leadership opportunity for him and a way to kind of really shine in a visible way. And he obviously bubbles up the issues to the head of security, but it's almost like the head of the groups haven't been as good on it as maybe the next 1 or 2 level downs until I prod them with it. But that's okay. It's kind of working as long as people that are on there responding and engaging with the feedback.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier when we were chatting in the back room that right now it feels like people are tired because it's the end of the season, so they're not getting as much activity because people are focused on.
Or the activity we're getting can be a little draining lately. So in August, September, it's been a long season and people have been there for a long time and they get worn out and the venting can start. So for example, the chicken fingers comment, we got a post a week ago saying that Aramark is our concessionaire. And the post was, Aramark's chicken tenders are lousy. Why can't we get them from Popeyes down the street? And I'm thinking, really? Like this is what it's become? And it does get tiring.
Right.
On people. But someone that I was talking to yesterday at the certification said something interesting that stuck with me. They said, you know what, the person that posted that one month could be posting a really, impactful suggestion the next month. So you want to be careful about how you respond to them because you don't want to turn them off of the tool.
Yeah, right. I think that suggestions can be coming from, you're like, this is not the appropriate venue for it. And we find a lot of organizations establish rules around Tiny Pulse, and they say you can put whatever you want, but if it's not productive towards culture or workplace, we really can't. We can't give it oxygen. We can't respond to it.
And we haven't thought about doing that yet. But because I haven't wanted to prevent I haven't wanted to prevent people from engaging with the tool and providing their feedback. But that might be kind of a 2.0 strategy that we take.
Oh, definitely. I find a lot of organizations they start here and they learn a lot, and they change things up or they re-energize it with a different type of, whether it's a culture committee where you're having employees look at the feedback and respond to it versus managers and leaders, or putting awards around cheers for peers, things like that. So speaking of cheers, I have to ask, have you sent, or has anyone sent a player a cheers for peers?
Not to my knowledge yet, but we have had a lot of interesting suggestions around players. So I think in June we had a custom question that was, I don't remember exactly how we worded it, but it said something about, what type of morale boosters would you like us to provide during the duration of the season? And we had a theme emerge saying we'd really like to have some kind of, connection established between us, members of the front office and the players. A lot of people have roles where they're in the clubhouse all the time, traveling with the team, but there are many that don't. So last Wednesday, we surprised people by grabbing a few players from the clubhouse and literally walking them through the halls of the offices, introducing them to people, having just kind of brief, mini encounters with some of the players. And that was just kind of an interesting little morale pick-me-up that we hadn't done before, and it all came out of Tiny Pulse.
Oh, cool! And it worked. And people were excited.
People were excited about it. I mean, they're sitting there working at their desk, and all of a sudden, Blake Swihart comes by and is like, "Hey, what are you doing?"
Pretty cool. If you had to pick a player right now, maybe because they clinched last night, to send a cheers to, who would it be, and what would you send?
Well, I didn't get to watch the game because of the time difference and being here, but I have read that Chris Sale got his 300th strikeout last night, so probably him.
Oh, cool. And going back to reality of actual cheers that you've sent or received, what's a cheer that you've seen or received that sticks out the most?
I remember, I think it was my second or third month with Tiny Pulse, and I remember getting a suggestion about having free tampons in the women's bathroom and thinking, oh my gosh, this is what my life has become. How dealing with this type of request. And I just remember feeling a little down about it and thinking, this isn't going in the direction that I want to go. And then later that night, I got an anonymous cheers, and it was from someone that said, thank you for all your efforts. It really shows how much the organization cares about its employees by what you're doing on here. So I thought, okay, you know what?
All right.
It's making a difference, and we're just going to kind of keep getting those suggestions from time to time.
The quick wins.
Yes. But it really is making a difference. And I remember you saying something to me when we did the manager training. Some of the suggestions and the actions that you take don't necessarily feel like they're linked to culture, but by doing them, it's an act of goodwill, and collectively over time, it will go a long way towards building that.
Right, and I think that there's an example of someone who's here. She started with Tiny Pulse a few years back, and one of the earliest suggestions was, we'd love a table in the ladies' room. And they're like, okay, that's pretty easy. So they did it, and they put a sticker on it that said, brought to you by Tiny Pulse.
We were thinking about that button saying brought to you.
So that just reinforces, it works. Of course, you don't want to make an assumption that you can just ask for anything in there, but just to kind of reinforce that these quick wins that do build goodwill.
Right.
And also, I think, build patience in the larger themes that come up through Tiny Pulse.
Definitely.
Yeah. Do you find that there are some Cheers all-stars that send a ton or receive a bunch?
Definitely. We have a lot of, when I look at our leaderboard, there's a lot of kind of, similar names in the, top tier senders and receivers. So I've been struggling with that a little bit because initially I think one of the months I did a shout out to the top senders and receivers, and we gave them tickets to, we had a David Ortiz roast that we gave them tickets to, so a little kind of perk. And then I've been trying to think of different ways to motivate people to engage with Cheers, because I don't want to just recognize the same people every month. So one month, I decided to recognize our remote workforce to kind of get them more pulled into the tool. So I did gift cards to some of our minor league coaches that had some, special Cheers on there. Another, when we launched it to our game day staff, I specifically picked out some members of the game day staff after the first month. So I tried to kind of strategically tie it to getting people to engage with the tool.
Oh, cool, based on Cheers.
Yes, using the Cheers. And I got an idea yesterday, in terms of engaging new hires with it, with Tiny Pulse as a whole, send them a cheer when they first start.
I think that's
so I like that idea. I want to take that one back.
Yeah, I find a lot of organizations, including Tiny Pulse, we have a different employee select the 3 cheers
I heard
that
that
best
yesterday.
represent
I like that.
cultural values. So it's not maybe the most prolific in terms of quantity, but ones that, and you're bringing it back to those cultural values that you think of as Tiny Pulse as an action that's following these values that you've created. Yeah, so that's an idea for you. I know we don't have much time, so I have a couple more questions outside of Tiny Pulse. So how much does the Red Sox record and how they're doing have in terms of the relation to the happiness of employees?
A lot. So
Hmm.
I started at the end of 2011. I don't know, do we have any Red Sox fans in here that follow the team? And no, all right. So I started at the end of 2011. It was like the collapse of 2011. I remember I accepted the job in September, and we kind of looked like we were going to the playoffs, and then I think we lost like every game after that and completely fell out of it. And that's when we, Terry Francona left, and we got Bobby Valentine, and Theo Epstein left, and we got a new general manager, and we had, I think, the worst record in 2012. And by the time August hits, when you have the worst record, it's hard to stay motivated because you've been there so long and the games don't mean anything at that point. And people are really passionate about the organization, so it's really exciting when we're doing well. And then you had the stark contrast to 2013 when we won the World Series, and everything is better. Everything is better when you're winning because the media is less, when we're not doing well, the media in Boston is so harsh. And everywhere you go, you're the Red Sox person. So every time you go to a party, people decide to, talk to you about what's going wrong and what you're doing wrong. And but when you're playing well, you feel like you're there for a purpose, and there could be something really special that comes out of it. And being part of 2013 was so incredibly special because it was the Boston Marathon, and I really honestly think that if that didn't happen, I don't know if I feel like the team really came together because of that for the city. And I think that had a lot to do with the fact that we won, behind that spirit behind it. And being able to be a part of just what kind of the front office, being able to go to St. Louis and being able to go to those games, that was incredibly special because we never get to watch a game with each other. We're all working the games. So all being able to sit with each other and watch the games and be a part of that, and then be a part of the parade and get rings, I mean, it completely affects the happiness.
I am sure. I think depending on how they do in the postseason, you should time your Tiny Pulse happiness
Yes.
question right there. Especially as Francis said, if they're compensated based on engagement
Right.
and
Well, our
happiness.
bonus program is, I mean, in a large part, is based on how well if we make it to the postseason, how far we go. So last night we hit that first tier, make it to the postseason, and everyone's probably thinking, all right, how much money was that worth it to me?
Cool. So I am going to turn this on and see the questions we have from the audience. Amazon opened up the store. Okay, so when you reference culture, does that include coaches and players or front office and staff only?
So it includes really everyone but the players. So the coaches, the scouts, the trainers, the front office, so all the business functions. The one group I haven't had luck engaging with the tool is our major league coaching staff. And honestly, I don't know if I ever will, because they're not used to engagement. I don't know if they've ever had engagement surveys or anything like that. Their sole focus is on winning these games, and they don't want to hear from me about pulsing and cheers and all of that. But the minor league coaches have really gotten engaged with the tool, and I think in key it was linked to us launching it in March when they were all together, because it was so cute. You could see them all cheersing each other and walking around the hallways and talking about it. And a lot of times they're cheersing each other in different languages because, they come from all over the world. And it was just a really nice thing to see them connect with it.
Yeah. And do you think, do the Red Sox players or major league coaching staff even know what the values are? Does that apply to them at all?
We've struggled with that because it's hard to get that one unified message out. We've started videotaping our town halls and sending them out to everyone so that those that are interested in it can hear it. But we definitely have struggled with it because there isn't, when I was at Boston Beer, we would have, one time a year, we would get the entire organization together and where we talk about things related to the business and culture. We don't have that kind of one time here where everyone's all together. So it is harder to get that message out to different parts. Within the Boston-based organization, I think everyone is very aware of it and knows it, and we can have a more personal impact on engaging with them, but it is tougher on the baseball side with, we think we have scouts internationally and some don't really, speak English, and it's harder to connect from that perspective.
Cool. Well, thank you for coming up and chatting with everyone and answering the questions. I think we're going to go to a break now. Are we going to do?
Okay.
Yeah, and can Amy pick the raffle, maybe?
Yep, we will.
All right.
Can I stick my hand in there?
Let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you.